I'd be happy to entertain questions at this time if that works.
So the one of them has to do with CCL advocates for putting a price on carbon emissions. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's a revenue neutral price, and that kind of is our main ask when we interface with members of Congress at all. But we appreciate everything that you've said about the value of the extraction and sequestration of carbon as a really important climate solution that really only agriculture can implement. So it's almost like agriculture, farmers are kind of like superheroes, or they could be. So there is a question. So one of the things we struggle with is whether or not a price on carbon would be bad, basically, for farmers. It's really, really hard for us to know. And there's a question here on the chat asking, will carbon fee and dividend, so our proposal is we put the price on carbon, and return all the dividends back to every household. So that would include a farming household. Will carbon fee and dividend be particularly hard on farmers? Will they have the same opportunities to switch to renewables? And I think you kind of addressed that a little bit in your most recent comment. So I wonder if you could comment on that whole issue of the impact of a price on carbon.
Sure. Most farmers would probably be concerned that that would impact them disproportionately. You know, there was a lot of resistance in rural communities to the Clean Power Plan because rural electric co-ops disproportionately rely on coal-fired power plants and have the most bleak picture in attaining the capital to make the changes they need to their power production. But that's not insurmountable. It was a matter of government policy at the time when we were building the rural co-ops. We were really heavy into coal because it was during the 70s. That was, you know, the OPEC embargo and things of that nature. So the you know, same policy schemata that really encouraged all the coal build out we could figure out a way to reverse or address that. I'm not sure how the fee and dividend schemata might work. How it would be different than cap and trade or what have you, but if you had a way to reward farmers to offer them value for their opportunities to sequester existing greenhouse gases in their soil, or make emissions reductions that other people can't make, if you had a way to offer them value for that, it would probably overshadow the fee and dividend impact that they'd endure. But you'd want to design the program, you know, in such a way where that occurred, where that was where we were encouraging producers to undertake climate smart practices.
Does anybody else have a question they'd like to?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for your talk, and what you're saying echoes a study that was conducted here in Oregon. It's called the Food Infrastructure Gap Analysis, and the summary finding of that study was that we are missing aggregation centers. So what used to be like a co-op or other small aggregators who specialized in dealing with multiple crops and worked in between the wholesaler and the farmer, they're basically gone. And that's also what I heard you say, is that it's very difficult to go to market with multi-crops. because they are smaller in quantity, and the market prefers contract farming, meaning they basically buy the crop before it goes into the ground. What do you see happening in this market? There are food hubs that are coming up through the Good Food Network. There are over 300 food hubs, but they're all pretty marginal in their impact. None of them have gone to scale yet. I mean, it seems like this is sort of the critical lever point that's missing in the marketplace.
We're really worried about food hubs. USDA and other folks made a significant investment to try to make that happen, and those are experiencing a slowdown in the moment. And that, I mean, food hubs are the most recent example. Every market that a farmer has to operate in, participate in, or utilize has been growing increasingly consolidated over time. In many cases, there's only one possible place to sell your grain or your apples or your cows or anything. Folks really need to stay committed to local food. If we want food hubs in particular to work out, folks need to work with their institutions to make sure that the food hubs are looked after. If you've got kids in school, talk to the school board about trying to stand up a food hub or utilize a food hub. So you've got local food in the schools. If you're near to or involved with a hospital or church, we really need institutions to start to pick it up on behalf of the food hubs, and that sentiment will work in other markets as well. But yeah, food hubs are really tricky because the product is so perishable. The logistics to collecting it and getting it out fast enough are very difficult to navigate. And our institutions just aren't ready to deal with that. Folks really have to be committed and make the decision that they're going to be able to navigate that. And if our schools and our hospitals and our other major food buyers can decide that they can accommodate, okay, this week we have way more potatoes than we thought, and next week we wanted this much kale, but there was a storm and we don't have the kale we thought, so we've got to sub it for something else. If our institutions can grow to accommodate those sort of variations, food hubs and other different scale, different locality food marketing systems will do better, and farmers will have more opportunities to grow in different ways.
Do you see any progress in the commercial buyers? I mean, let's say Costco or Walmart. Is there any interest in or an understanding in these groups of what transformation agriculture has to go through as we move forward?
In some limited ways. In some ways, it's very encouraging to witness, for example, Walmart's interest in organic production. That will probably cause something of an uptick in organic production, and that uses slightly fewer inputs than conventional production. That may produce some benefits in some ways. There's a lot of hay being made about Walmart's recent introduction of local food. I don't think that they'll be able to keep that up or market local food in a way that benefits farmers such that they'll be interested in working with Walmart. There's a lot of really top-down stuff coming from the major buyers. That's not going to work particularly well in the long run. That's got to be more of a conversation rather than just receiving really restrictive orders from major buyers like that.
Mm.
Okay, Tom, I'll read a question from the chat list. We have a question about crop insurance, and it asks, what if crop insurance could be made more affordable to the climate smart farming practices in relation to other practices? And I'll elaborate that on a bit, knowing that we have the risk management agency that oversees federal crop insurance, and their actuaries make decisions about how to change their formulations. And soil health is this very difficult to quantify kind of characteristic. Can you comment on any movement in addressing crop insurance and how it might respond to how farmers manage their soils in this regard?
Yeah, I'm fairly optimistic about that, but in the long run. Actuaries take an awful lot of data to change. They're going to need to study this for a long time before they're comfortable offering an incentive to someone for soil health practices, for example. But I do think they'll get there because these practices, help farmers who use them avert disasters that are very costly to insurance adjusters. The first step will be to keep crop insurance from discouraging you from using conservation practices and climate smart practices. But I think that over time, and with sufficient observation of the data, it won't be this farm bill, but maybe in a farm bill or two, assuming that we keep having farm bills, which is a completely open question, given the falling number of farmers in the country. But I think I'm pretty sure that over the course of my career, I'll witness that. I think they'll get there. I think these practices we want to encourage really make the farm more resilient, and that's what the insurance company wants. So I think that's going to work out over time. I have access to the chat list too. Should I be reading these questions or?
Sure, if you'd like.
I'll jump out with, I'll just grab another one from earlier on. It asks, it references what kind of reaction can we expect regarding from where folks get information that may influence their skepticism or to climate change. And maybe Tom, can you comment on, enlighten us a little more on where the farming community tends to get its information relative to all of these issues we're talking about?
Absolutely. This is a big one because farmers should not be a population for whom this is a contentious issue. They are out there in the weather. They are more in tune with the weather than any of us. And weather isn't climate, but they observe weather closely enough to, in turn, observe climate. But they are, in this moment, extremely wary of regulation. Farmers have been told that they're extremely overregulated, that the EPA wants to come out and repossess their farm, and that they're gonna, if they concede an inch on climate change, that someone's gonna come out and start measuring the methane that their cows emit and, charging them for it and regulating them right out of business for it. There are very acute political forces at play. There's a lot of people who have a very, I would go ahead and say, regressive conservative political agenda, who are pursuing that by making farmers afraid of the government and afraid of regulation. And those forces that really want to manipulate farmers have intrinsically linked climate change to the regulatory agenda. And that's kind of where we're at. If anyone is interested in kind of viewing that, I would tune into the debate over WOTUS, or changes to the definition of waters of the United States, that was proposed a couple years ago during the Obama administration. There was an awful lot of very nasty rhetoric and campaigning in the countryside. And while that doesn't, WOTUS didn't talk about climate, it's that sort of conversation that folks are subjected to.
Hey, Tom, this is Rick Knight. I was the one who kind of raised that question. And I guess what I was thinking also was, what reaction would you get if you try to make the point that our policy that we propose is a market encouraging policy that could be used to mitigate or take away some of the regulations that they may be afraid of, by rather putting the climate policy into the market on the fossil fuel side, even though we know that they would be concerned that it would cost them more for diesel fuel, for fertilizer, and so on. That the other side of the coin would be an easing of regulation. How does that play?
You'll get some folks there, but a significant number of others, it's just, if you're talking about carbon and climate, you're not going to get there. I can't give you proportions or percentages. It's worth it to have the conversation and see. Lead with reducing regulations, but it really depends on the farmer, and and that should change over time too. That's the age of the American farmer is really concentrated right now. We're going to see that open up a little bit over time and become more diverse and rounded over time, and we'll have a different experience then. But for now, that's just kind of how it is. We're not going to get everyone on board.
Anybody else? Anybody on the phone?
Yeah, I posed a question. Obviously we don't want to see more regulation, because, how do you regulate farmers to such a level of detail? But how can you switch that around and do what market economy wants to do, and which is create a system of incentives to steer the farmer in the right direction? So, obviously one gap is the infrastructure, the market infrastructure, and that's a bigger topic. But how can you incent the farmer to bury soil in the carbon and bury carbon in the soil, and to engage in soil management that is mitigating what climate change is doing?
Well, a lot of it is education, right? If you've got really healthy soil that you have that you've managed with intention, you will save on fertilizer. Farmers don't like buying fertilizer. It's expensive. It takes time to apply it. So there's some low-hanging fruit there. There is. We need to, we talk about changing the frame a lot and getting folks to think in terms of margins rather than yields. You don't have to grow as many bushels per acre if you didn't spend as much money to grow the bushels per acre. You'll make the same or better money by reducing costs rather than having more product to sell. And in fact, as volatile as commodity markets are for farmers, it's generally better for farmers if there's less product on the market. So that will get a lot of people making the economic argument. You save on your pesticides, save on your fertilizer. and I'm sorry, I kind of got focused on that. And
so is there a way to say for every ton of carbon that you bury in your soil will pay you X amount of money? Is that a possibility?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we're getting there. There's some satellite technology that can take some accounting for that. They have devices on the farm. I think Comet Farm is a technology suite that the Natural Resources Conservation Service has deployed to actually monitor carbon content in the soil on a working farm. Those tools need some work for a greater and more economically effective deployment, but that's something we're working on. And you can also pay for practice. There's a lot of technical assistance available. You can just offer a farmer money to do something that we know is going to sequester carbon in the soil. It's not as good as verifying it's there and paying for the ton, but if there's a practice that we know in this area of Illinois or this area of Montana, and we can get a rough estimation if they've got this soil type and using this crop, it's going to have roughly this carbon sequestration aspect. You know, you could do worse things than pay for the practice without absolutely getting out there and verifying the ton per every acre or what have you.
Hey, Tom, I'll throw in another question. We have a question earlier about who are the best messengers to farmers about conservation farming. Are state extension agencies talking about these practices? Go ahead.
Yes. There are probably some state extension agencies that are talking about this fairly explicitly. I recently undertook a climate communications course that Cornell University promoted with USDA, and I noted that a lot of my classmates were involved in extension. Extension's reputation varies a lot state to state. Some states, they really love extension. In Ohio, where I grew up, extension is pretty visible, pretty robust. I work with a lot of farmers in North Dakota, and they don't necessarily have the best opinion of extension in North Dakota. So there's some state and regional variances you're dealing with. But you are looking for extension or the modern replacements of extension a lot of times. In some cases, that might be getting to the co-ops. The co-ops have a lot of agronomy services, and you see it happening. Land O'Lakes has a large sustainability platform that they are promoting among their among the dairy producers that Land O'Lakes works with and services. CHS is a very large agricultural cooperative that Farmers Union works with quite a bit, and they have a precision agriculture product called Yield Point that helps you variable rate nitrogen application. So you're doing that precision nitrogen application. And folks, trust the people that they buy their seed from, buy their fertilizer from, etc. So yeah, I guess extension would be your messengers, and then the people who in the modern day when extension might not be what it used to be. Those folks who are kind of stepping in to replace extension are the big parts of the solution. Also throw in Farmers Union has our history is such that we're not always completely we have an adversarial role to play with major input providers and stuff like that. So I would go so far as to argue that making sure extension is well funded and well functioning is a really important part of getting this message out as well. We should be helping extension function at its best and repair its relationships where they're not as good.
And kind of on that topic, I don't want to miss the chance to ask you about the climate leaders community at Farmers Union. That's, if I understand, that's a Facebook page and some other means of communication. Any neat things going on there in conversations related to climate and farming?
Well, we've had the format for a bit more than a year now. We have a weekly post that tries to offer farmers some instruction or provoke thought on climate change. Where I opened, we really extensively discussed the damages that climate change can bring onto your farm, so that you want to think about ways to address it, adapt and mitigate. But we've covered that. We've covered all the practices that the NRCS has a conservation standard practice for. And now actually we're trying to move more into instructing farmers on enhancing